Oh, I think we're live again. Did it show record on your end?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. This is Oleg and Darren again. This will be our, I believe, third installment, or is it fourth already?
Mm, Technically speaking, fourth, but the third released.
Yeah, true enough. I guess the big news of the week is that we have agreed on a name.
Yeah.
We came up with the X Files, EX, or expat, and ex-military intelligence. So we'll go with that when we post the pods from here on in. Um, we picked a topic today to cover. Well, first of all, hello, Oleg. It's good to hear from
Um,
you again and hear your voice.
Hi there. Nice to meet you too. It's always a great pleasure.
Return. I pick a topic that's not really my lane, and those are often my favorite topics because I get to brainstorm how I would do things, and I get to learn from other people that have already done those things. So this will be more your wheelhouse than mine, which is absolutely
Some of your
fine for
life
me.
circumstances showed us that lately you have more practice than me in this field.
Well, it's not by choice, but yeah, as it turns out, I
It's
seem to
never
be.
it's never our choice.
Well, yeah, true enough. Yeah, my understanding and progression in surveillance and counter surveillance is we'll call it developing rapidly and on the fly. So we'll we'll go from there. But traditionally, this is definitely your wheelhouse, which is good. I like to see you get some exposure with things that are uh, your expertise and your area of interest. And it also gives me a chance to learn from you and to give whatever input I can to see if I know what I'm talking about. So we've talked about surveillance and counter surveillance before on the pages that we've been a part of together. We've talked about it privately. We've both written articles on it. So, I mean, it is a topic of interest. And I think the first misnomer that we can get into is that the perception, the average perception of a civilian or citizen on surveillance and counter surveillance is that it's high tech and that it's
First of all,
always,
excuse me
go
for
ahead.
interrupting. First of all, I would like to make a short disclaimer
Sure.
uh, for those who would probably listen to us. The information that I will share here will not help you dealing with government or law enforcement surveillance because it is a multi-layer thing, and to perform counter surveillance operations against government agents or law enforcement agents, first of all, you need to know how they work. And being alone, it is impossible. So, guys, if you want to Jason Bourne movie, please switch the channel.
I'd say that's a pretty good disclaimer.
It's for
Yeah, I'm with
civilians.
that as well. I think the average civilian in the first part is probably uh, generally not going to need this, but we'll get into why that is at a later date. Just to finish off that first thing before I hand the ball over to Oleg for a little while, I think that's a huge misperception in the industry is that surveillance and counter surveillance involves extremely high tech stuff, top notch equipment, a lot of money, and that's not always the case. I mean, I have a number of examples that I'll get into as we go, as I'm sure Oleg will as well, living in the third or undeveloped world here. That is absolutely not the case. That low tech surveillance happens generally on a daily basis and in a variety of different circumstances. Um, he can jump in here for a bit, and if you want to give the intro on to definitions and where we're
Well,
going to head with this, I'll pass the ball to you for a minute.
all right. Well, no special definitions. As soon as we are talking, we're two civilian guys talking about civilian things.
Mm-hmm. No, no.
Yep, I agree. In our common daily life, uh, the possible surveillance attempt is usually 90% is low tech, because criminals do not use drones to stalk you. They just, well, follow you or something like that. Low level private eyes also do not use all this thing, etc. Well, for example, if your wife wants to divorce you, for example.
Mhm.
Something. It's that very old school that sometimes sometimes it is useful, sometimes it is not, dependent on the situation. But in our common civilian life, it will usually be low tech.
It will.
Here I agree.
Yeah. Just to give an example from here, at least, people here I've discovered over the last 10 years, when we talk about lower to lower middle class Latinos in general here, they're usually, I've found, at least my experience, they're far more innovative than North Americans when cutting corners, out of necessity and because of the culture they live in. They find efficient, cost effective, or free, high percentage ways to accomplish whatever their goal is. So a tail here, somebody following you or surveilling you can be far more serious. Sicarios here, or hired assassins, are generally extremely low class. The cost of hiring one of these contract killers is extremely low, and we've seen that with some expats here that have been previously kidnapped or killed in the past couple of years. And generally, their thing is to find out what your habits are, find out what your daily activity is, where you're going to be at a certain time. And it's usually done from a very cheap little scooter or motorcycle with one or two people. And they look innocuous until the last second, like any working class guy on a bike. Apparently, here, they can cost anywhere as low as 50 to $100. So, I mean, what is the point of this? Surveillance here, at least, is rare. Private eyes or surveillance teams, like Oleg was saying before, are usually only hired by the rich. Rich Costa Ricans or North American expats that have a lot of disposable cash. And most are not directing that money to low class or majority poor people that are targets for them. They're not going to put out that kind of money unless the threat or danger is of the real high order variety. So generally, you're not a target. I mean, you want to add to that?
Basically, no. No, I totally agree with you. And I would like to add that first of all, everyone of us knows perfectly well his or her own biography, and the first thing to start with is to analyze it and think over these very words you said. Are you a potential target of surveillance? And 99% you are not.
Agreed. I mean, for me, I'm not a millionaire. I'm not the CEO of a large company or an heir to a small, fortune. I'm not the inventor of a life-changing tech product or any kind of a spy with insider trading secrets. So, I mean, the pragmatic, grounded way of looking at this is I'm generally not a target. That being said, I mean, you and I have talked about this in the past, and you've tended to agree with me on this. For me, even as a business owner, a small business owner here of a bed and breakfast, when I'm doing general security from the perspective of a business owner, I reverse engineer things in terms of if I'm looking at my own property as a potential target for robbery or burglars, not just surveillance, but somebody scoping out and trying to find data and information on me. I think about what I would do if I were them, putting myself in that position. What are the entry points to my property? Where could I get caught if I need a quick escape? where are the vantage points where what is inside the property is most easily seen? Are there high points where people can scope it out? How is the traffic coming in and out of the area? Are they blocked off? Do they need a passcode? So, I mean, a lot of those elements, when you're thinking about how you would be under the microscope, I try and think from my end as a civilian, how, if I were scoping me out, what I would look for. What are the things that are important to me? What kind of accessibility do I have? Where can I find important documentation? What are the patterns of the people that are living there? And I don't just mean the easily, oh, change your route. I mean, everybody says that, but what does that mean? Changing your route. If you're being followed or you think you're being followed, it's a more complex thing generally than just picking a different avenue to go somewhere. Do you want to expand on that at all?
Yep. Uh, Again, I totally agree. And moreover, I usually uh, do not trust these kind of advice, like
No.
change the route. Basically, if someone is stalking you, the in the majority of cases, like 99%, he knows the terrain as well as good as you,
Yes.
if not better.
Hmm.
So if you know, for example, 5 different routes to one place, so probably he or she also knows these 5 paths and one more, for example.
Hmm.
So usually just changing the route is not an option,
Hmm.
because a well, I'm not talking about a very professional, but the more or less experts to the way of thinking is that in every point of the route, they could create different uh, additional routes to the point.
Hmm.
And usually, if you want to change the path, you create the same map as they do.
Hmm.
So it's not like a prediction, it's that common sense that both of you share.
Yep.
And the probability that you will choose the route that your stalker would not is very low. And basically, it is too late to change routes. It's better to hide,
Hmm.
to completely hide in this kind of situation if you detect hostile surveillance. But hostile surveillance detection is also a very tricky thing, and the largest amount of misconceptions I found in this area detection.
Do you want to get into any of those, or are you at liberty to?
Well, I can. I'm retired. No, in the and in another country.
Fair enough. What are some of the misconceptions that you're
uh,
mentioning?
I would mention one, the largest one. When dealing with surveillance detection, people usually are looking for persons. It's like agents, persons who follow you, trying to remember faces and etc. It doesn't work usually, because first of all, uh, guys that perform surveillance operation usually work at least in pair, never alone. Even if they are alone, we should consider them being not alone.
Hmm. Agreed.
And you will never, and basically, you will never detect a person who is stalking you in the crowd, for example,
Hmm.
because it's a dead end to make such a decision to look for a guy who is looking for you, because if that guy is more or less aware of what he's doing, he would be as natural as anyone else.
Yeah.
So the first thing is, if you want to detect the possible surveillance, once again I underline this word possible surveillance, because returning to my previous words, 99% you are not an object, is to look for correlations. That's how every government surveillance and counter-surveillance agents behave. Correlation is some happening that takes place simultaneously with yours. For example, you are leaving the cafe, 2 or 3 guys are leaving that cafe at the same time or a bit later. It is a correlation. Basically, it doesn't mean anything. They could just, well, be the clients as well.
What about stacking coincidences?
There will be lots of them. Looking for correlations, you will receive a huge amount of false positive responses.
Mm-hmm.
That is, civilians call them coincidences, and that's all right. That's a part of job.
Yep. One of the things I've been followed here a few times, as you know, in different circumstances, and one of the things that I do is what I call stacking, like you said, where if I leave a cafe and get in my car, and another gentleman leaves the cafe and gets in his car, I notice that, but it doesn't mean anything. It's just something to file away for future reference. Now, if we take the same turn to a left-sided street and he continues following me, it's a second thing to note. It may not mean anything. The more those things stack, he makes continual turns. He's paying very close attention to what I'm doing. He may be seemingly taking down information of things of pertinence, my car, my model, my license plate. The more we stack those things, like we had that high order predator event, that was stacking to me was very important because you start building a profile on the fly where things start adding up into an overall picture. So instead of 5 or 6 coincidences, you now have one correlation of a confirmed following, and then you can react accordingly. It's been confirmed at this point, and now we take the next step in terms of what's happening. But that stacking to me is very important because people stop at 1 or 2 things where they go, this car's been following me for 2 or 3 kilometers. Oh my God. And here on the
empty
straight
highway.
streets, yeah, I mean, exactly. You know, like it's not abnormal from San Jose to Alajuela.
Yeah.
Or a car on a 6-lane highway in rush hour to follow you for 2 or 3 kilometers. It's abnormal. I mean, if a car continually passes other cars to try and get in behind you and specifically you, and starts taking different turns and risks, I mean, yeah, maybe that's one of those things that you stack. But I mean, most people, when they see one thing, it's most often, like you said, 99% of the time, just one thing. So it's not something to start changing your dynamic or getting paranoid about, because we go again back to you're not generally a target. But when those things start stacking on top of each other to 5 or 6 or 7, that's when you start paying attention and you start finding things out in that regard.
To make things easier, the second step to detect correlations is to specify the vantage points, as you said before.
Mm-hmm.
From just to take a look at the street, at your area, at your district, near your house or apartment block, and just to think where would you survey someone
Yep.
if you need, and just then check these places and basically there will not be many of them.
Yep.
Just and if this is the second like triangulation. The second line of the triangulation is if correlation happens in this point, it is something to think about already.
Mhm. I'll just add two things to that, and you tell me if I'm off base or not. You having the greater experience. Um, Taking away vision is a thing. It is a counter surveillance tool where you take away the possibility of being surveilled in the first place. And there's a strategy to that. When you do what you were saying is you look at vantage points and where the greatest vantage points are from another person's perspective, you can start countering that by stealing vision, by taking away accessibility, utilizing various strategies. Apertures are another thing. If you know where people can see you, can you develop a place where you can see them, but they can't see you?
They can look at you but not see.
Exactly.
My
But
favorite.
but they can, you know, even if you're in a mall, do you have mirrors and silhouettes and opportunities to see people
Funny
while
thing.
they're not able to see you,
The
or it can
funny
be on a
thing
very
is
grand level.
that this trick is widely used in Hollywood,
It
and it
is.
works in real life.
Yep. Yeah, it does. By finding vantage points where you take away vision but have the vision to see
Another
other
thing
people.
is to spoil the vantage point,
Yeah.
to make it inappropriate to do anything. For example, from my perspective, I once, sorry for what I'm going to say, I once
I don't mind.
cheated.
Hmm.
I cheated in some place just to make it inappropriate for surveillance.
Interesting.
It was actually the ceiling of a non-inhabited building.
Hmm.
And that was a perfect vantage point to perform surveillance on my
Hmm.
client, and that's why. And basically, we were not able to do anything about it. So we just cheated there every day
Interesting.
in turns, in shifts.
In shifts. I think there's some, you know, I don't know, you can jump in here too. I think there are some, you know, civilian methods that are very
It
low
was a
key.
civilian method.
No, I know, but even moving forward, like people think that there's this big romantic thing about surveillance, that it's going to take place. You know, there are very frequent Hollywood stereotypes that come into play, like you
Boring
said.
as hell, the
That
most
that
boring
it's
thing.
yeah, that it's exciting for one, that it always takes place at a distance, that there are all these complex tactics used. I mean, there was somebody that I was following once, and you know what the best easiest way to get in? People think that surveillance people are outside of their business, that are spying inside their business. The easiest way when you're doing low key, low tech surveillance is become a client. Stay at their place of, if it's a
Or
hotel,
employee.
stay at their place of residence, become an employee. The minute you put money into their business and compliment them and show an interest in their perspective on things, their paranoia and distrust most often goes somewhere else. And it's such a simple base tactic. But I mean, if I wanted to do surveillance or spy on somebody like me, rent a room.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no easier thing than that. And the perception that surveillance is on the outside and it couldn't possibly be from a guest or an employee on the inside is paramount. I mean, so few people think of the very simple things. They're always thinking in a very complex manner. But
Because Hollywood and books teach us.
In
to
that way,
think.
Hollywood is great. If Hollywood can misinform the people that I'm potentially doing surveillance on or that are doing it on me, I'm 6 steps ahead already. That's valuable. Their entire idea or perception of what surveillance and counter surveillance is already skewed before it even starts.
Unless you are dealing with experts.
Yes, fair enough.
But the chances are very low.
Yeah. So, anyways, do you remember? I mean, I think there are some other misconceptions that surveillance is always physical. Um, and with the internet now, we have a ton of things where people can trace and track and like geotagging and GPS trackers and low
Yeah.
cost bugs and free cell phone apps. It makes it very accessible for the average person to do far more than they were ever capable of.
Talking
I
frankly,
have a I have an ex-military friend who served multiple tours of duty, and he posted on Facebook, "Gonna be at the Maroon 5 concert tonight from 5 to 8 p.m. Looking forward to it. Gonna have some beers." And I emailed him and I said, "Stop doing that, man. I mean, you're telling every potential burglar when you're going to be gone, where you live, what time you're going to be back, what you're planning on doing, and what state you're going to be in when you return. I mean, cut it out." And it hadn't even dawned on him um, that information gathering on social media is damn near free and can be self-achieved.
again
Yep.
agree. Though I would, this topic comes very close to cybersecurity,
Mm-hmm.
and I am not a very great expert in it, and just a small possible advertising thing. Uh, I have a guy, I worked with him during my past life. He's an expert in cybersecurity and information security stuff. And if I succeed in, he's also retired. And if I succeed to talk him to participate in that topic, would you be against
Mm-hmm.
or
No,
not?
I don't mind.
Okay, so if we dedicate a separate discussion to this topic,
Just
that would be great.
to cybersecurity.
Yeah,
No, of course.
cybersecurity, cyber surveillance, and etc. How to be more or less low level under radar in
Mm-hmm.
the in the world of digits.
No,
I'm
we
a
can do
physical
that.
guy. I'm a physical guy. I witnessed the creation of the internet. So the major part of my job was physical as hell.
Yeah. No, but just the point that the digital can transfer into the physical. I mean,
Of
it's
course.
very easy if you want to stalk somebody, or I mean, a lot of us have been stalked or followed or pursued, or I mean, some of us even hunted. Um, but that can start on the internet and make its way into the physical. I mean, if you're geotagging your posts, um, if you have your GPS tracker on your phone on all the time, these are ways that even low level physical threats or surveillance operatives for whatever reason can easily find a place where you're isolated or can glean more information if you're not a violent target. They can find out a lot just from that social media thing transferring into real life. I mean, people give out. Do you remember that exercise that I did? It was a couple of years ago, and I remember
Yeah.
there were a lot of people that were
With
shocked online.
with a car plate.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I, I,
a great one.
I yeah, I don't know why that popped into my. Well, yeah, I mean, I know how I think, but we were at a red light, and a guy had a baby seat in the back of his car, and he had a bumper sticker that was fairly unique. That's what caught my attention. And here you can, I mean, I'll get into this quickly if you don't mind.
Yeah, of course. It's an
We
interesting
did,
case.
I did a social experiment here. So, I mean, from that license plate, I went and looked up on the license registry in the country, and you can find out a lot of information on a person from that registry. So, I mean, I found out his name. I found out who the registered owner was. I found out the make and model of the car. I found out where he lived. From there, I went to an information page on Costa Rican residents, and I found out the date that his father passed away, who his mother is, who his siblings are, who he's married to. So then from there, I go on to various levels of social media, like LinkedIn and Facebook and Twitter, and I find his name, where he's given lots more information, like how old his child is and what his child's name is, what his occupation is, for how long he's been doing it, what business he owns and where it's located and what the hours are, where his son goes to school. I found out what his wife does and what her profession is. And it went on and on. And I mean, I know a ton on this guy and his wife just from this methodology. And no one is the wiser. To protect his identity, I didn't post any of his information on social media. I blocked off his license plate. But I mean, it was amazing, the information I found on this guy, just by showing a little bit of ingenuity and knowing where the dots can be connected and knowing the layout of the country here. And you can get an entire full profile on an individual. So then what I did was I started looking back in his Facebook posts, and you find out a little bit about his personality and what he likes and dislikes and who his closest responders are that give input on that page. And then you go to LinkedIn and find out what his previous work experience is and what he did before and where he went to school. You can tap in, I think, for $5 and sign on to a site where you don't reveal who you are that's showing interest in this person. And then you can get tax files and previous government information. I mean, it was an amazing little experiment. Now, some of those probably aren't as easy because they've blocked certain of those avenues off, or they're cautious or precautious on that information going public. But as a little social experiment, it was wonderfully successful. And I've done it a number of times since with other people. And it's been successful every time. And the mountain of volume of information was breathtaking, that if I wanted to hunt this guy in any way or for whatever reason, I don't. Disclaimer of my own. But if I did, that opportunity would present itself very, very easily. You want to jump in there? I remember you were a part of that conversation on that little experiment as well.
Yeah, it was a great one, though I must admit that it is very dependent on the country you are living in, because
Yes.
To find out so much information starting with the license plate is not so possible, for example, in our country, because civilians do not have access to the database of license plates.
No, no, in Canada either. Here I got lucky because that is, you can
Yeah.
find out who is,
So,
if it's a corporation or.
but it was a very demonstrative thing, I guess, illustrational. That, yep, having one or two entry points of information regarding a person, you can find out the major part of his biography.
Mhm.
That's true. I once helped my friend basically to date a girl using this kind of stuff.
Continue.
Well, he met a girl and he tried to make a joke on him and said something like, I don't remember, it was when it was many years ago during my service. He was like something, if you find my phone number, I will date you, something like that. And basically I found her phone number for him without using my government background, like addressing, for example, police and etc. It would have been the easiest way, but it was not sportive.
Ah, yeah. I mean, that I had one of my wife's friends dare me and say, you wouldn't be able to find me on Facebook. And it was within 15, 20 minutes of us sitting here and having beers. And she got a new, oh, she's like, oh, somebody just added me as a friend. And it was that easy, just connecting the dots. I
Yeah.
mean, like acquaintances, both last family names, rough age, job description. And I have yet to look for somebody actively. For me, I do it not to build my friend base, but when I want to look for somebody from my past, I do it doggedly because it's, to me, I'm honing those skills. I don't care, I mean, about interacting with you or generally seeing what you're doing in your life now. But if the challenge is finding you originally, after that, I don't care anymore. But the majority of times, somebody from my past, I have yet to not find somebody. If they're on social media, I have been able to find them 100% of the time. If they're not, they don't come up,
Social
and I'll
media
find them at a
is a
later
tricky
time.
thing.
Yeah.
I just not long ago I found out that my profile, my Facebook profile, is not very easy to find, though I did not make any precautions regarding it. It's my official profile, like I have it many years.
Mm-hmm.
But people who tried to find me, the majority of them fail for some reason. I don't know why.
Seriously? You
Yeah,
don't know why, or
I
you're?
was greatly surprised. I don't know why. It's
That's interesting.
just a regular profile,
Uh-huh.
and with a decent amount of information like name, last name, birth date, and this kind of stuff.
Uh-huh.
But for some reason, people fail.
Interesting. No,
Interesting.
I've never had a problem finding anybody on Facebook.
Yeah, me too. But and I think that, well, it's an open profile basically. But
But I don't think most people are good at connecting dots and
yeah,
doing that step by step. You know, where does this connect to? Where does this connect to? Where does this connect to? And then uh, how do I interconnect those points on the web? Uh, here a thing too. Like one of the anomalies here is that private investigation uh, here is very rare. And most of the PIs, strangely, are gringos. They're white North Americans, uh, and they stand out. So I mean, it's obvious when as a PI you have a team, of locals and nationals. I mean, that's the smart thing to do. And PIs aren't protection, and private investigators aren't uber present here. But it's hard. Any white gringo that doesn't speak Spanish and doesn't dress like the nationals is going to have an extremely hard time doing surveillance. So I mean, we go back to that gray man theory that we talked about two episodes ago. I mean, if you're not contracting locals, and that's here a trust issue as well, where they can turn on you due to the low wages in that field because there isn't much money to be made as a PI here, regardless of how efficient you think you are, and especially only with a civilian background, it can backfire on you quite greatly. So I mean that in itself is a method of counter surveillance where your own team is working against you.
yeah.
But you and I were talking about
And
that.
sometimes the background is not a very good thing, because when you have a background during those years, you could apply for help of your agency.
Mhm,
So some things were accessible to you that are already not accessible to you when you are a private eye or a civilian.
mhm,
Uh, Thus, even the background is not the guarantee of the fact that you would be successful as a surveillance or counter surveillance agent in the private sector. I know a good guy. He's in my opinion, he's one of the best in private sector counter surveillance. He has no background at all.
No
He
background
he
in terms of military
in
or
terms of
LE.
military or intelligence or etc. No, he is just a civilian who took multiple courses. He studied and studied.
Mhm.
Though he studied from the best, I
Yeah.
must admit.
Mhm. Yeah, I think you can get good at a thing very efficiently without having a background. I mean, even
His
here,
teachers were guys with a background.
yeah. But I mean, even as I mean, I'm a civilian. I'm not military trained. I don't have a vast background from other people. Most of the things that I have learned here have been self-learned or self-taught. Um, I mean, even here, things that are seemingly very innocuous because we live in a little compound here where there are other families around too, and nobody lifts an eyebrow when somebody showed up at our door a while ago, feigning being a longtime neighborhood resident and asking for some money as he had fallen on hard times and things were tough. Strangely, he was wearing a well-pressed white dress shirt, carrying a clean backpack, and wearing non-ripped jeans. And he started asking about the property and asked to be let out the gate again. And I followed him down the street for a little while. And he didn't go to any other place on the block. He came straight to ours. And when he got rejected, he left, which for somebody who's desperate for cash also didn't add up. So, I mean, when you factor in the A, he wasn't familiar in the neighborhood, B, he's wearing clothes that don't fit the description of what he's telling you he is, C, doesn't go to any other places in the neighborhood, even though he's desperate for cash, that's an anomaly. I mean, so even following him down the street, he went directly to a bus stop. So he's clearly not, again, from the area. Nobody else noticed, even though, he checked out a couple of other places within the compound here. Um, again, point being, surveillance doesn't need to be done with tech or even from a car or a vehicle over a certain time period. It can be done in a very short period of time for a very specific intent. I mean, we've had a number of cars here that got locked inside the compound, apparently. They came in and thought it was a different business and were let in by somebody who was overtly casual about letting them in the gate. And then they were stuck in here. So, I mean, it could have been completely accidental, but the fact that nobody asks these questions and they were let in the gate in the first place and allowed to scope it out in some way um, is another point of reference where most people don't see anything. We even had an incident, and I'll just quickly do this one too. Uh, One of the members of my wife's family had $1,000 missing, and it had accumulated over time.
That's
And
a huge sum for your region.
yeah, and nobody knew what to do about it, and nobody could explain why it was happening. I said, here, I'm going to take the iPod or the iPad, and I'm going to place it in between these two pillows, and let's just leave it on overnight. When you're going out the next morning, tell me, and we'll set it up and turn it on. And within an hour, we found out that the gardener had tiptoed in and looked over his shoulder and went into her wallet and stole a bunch of her cash. And it was on camera, and he was none the wiser for it. So over lunch hour, he got busted, and uh, he was fired and solved. I mean, in the 12-hour period. Whereas this had been going on for months and months and months, but nobody was any the wiser because it was a gradual progression of loss. So I mean, those are tiny little simple things that you know can and have been done by tons of people, but most people don't think of it. Just some simple surveillance ideas that are low cost, easy to implement, and don't take a rocket scientist to put into action.
Again, agree. But sometimes if we are not talking about business owners or even small business owners, but individuals, it usually demands brain working, and
Yeah.
and at the start it is quite difficult.
Mhm. Do you
For
have
example,
any advice for people on how to glean
first,
more on this
uh,
topic on both of them?
vantage points. As I said before, biography check, vantage points, correlations, and knowing it is also can be called a correlation, but you should be familiar with the how can I say it in English, people flow in your area. Now let me explain a bit. It's also, by the way, a misconception. It's about that thing that you should remember all the license plates of the cars nearby, all the models, and etc. and etc. It's all bullshit.
Yep.
Even the best of us cannot remember all the license plates in an area.
Agreed fully.
You should be familiar with the flow, like the most common models of the cars. How often do they drive, the traffic waves, where it is heavy, when it is not. And when you feel this flow, that's this everyday flow, including weekends, you would detect something that is out of place. And usually, if a person is, if someone puts you under surveillance, these guys will not be from your area, definitely.
Mhm.
So they to just do this little experiment, and you see that to get accustomed to the flow would take a week, and at least a week. So the surveillance guys will not get accustomed to it very quickly, so they will be out of place, like leaving the car when where no one leaves it because it is too hot or too cold or someone cheated there, usually like me.
What are things
and
you should pay attention
and
to?
to, little things that are out of place.
Uh-huh.
Something new cars, for example, new people that are not usually seen here. For example, uh, well, you never see a social workers in the area, and bam, you see one. For example, it's it's 90% that it would be false positive, but still.
Mhm.
Uh,
What are some things as a person that is concerned about being under surveillance can do? What are some things that they can
the
pay
first
attention
thing
to
he
themselves?
should address professionals immediately, regardless of the fact whether it will be law enforcement agency or private sector professionals.
Valid. Um,
Because the professionals, they know their job. They will they will help, and they will be more effective than this person himself or herself. For example, even if a businessman has a VIP protection, like close protection guys are trained to protect, but not to counter survey.
mhm.
So please address the professionals.
I at times
And sorry, I just
nope.
go on for a second.
Uh-huh.
And if you are an individual, like we are told before, and you suddenly found out that you noticed a correlation but not a coincidence, a set of things that can state that you are under surveillance, please address the professionals.
Mhm.
Because counter surveillance is a very sensitive thing. Even the smallest mistake could spoil everything.
Mhm.
And what makes things worse, uh, you most probably, if you are not an expert, you will never notice that you made this mistake.
Mhm.
So please address the professionals.
Here, I'll just add this: being a foreigner, an expat, a North American here, and knowing that there are places of deep corruption that may manipulate circumstance, I have, through the experiences that I've had here, felt better handling it myself. And that's not uh, me condoning or telling you to do the same. That is not a vote of confidence for the average person doing what they want. But considering the circumstances that we've had and the contexts that we've had them in, I have not felt good or secure reaching out to professionals to handle it. There were times where it wasn't an option. Um, there may have been one or two that it was, but in hindsight, I haven't. So, I mean, that is particular circumstance and based on very specific dynamics. I mean, the average person living, in a very low key area that they're comfortable with, that they were raised in, I mean, isn't going to have to worry about those things. But those are things here in my particular circumstance that I also have to be aware of about how much professionals, as in terms of law enforcement or PIs, are going to benefit my situation or help me out in a positive way without making it a bigger mess. You want to jump in there on that?
Partially agree, knowing you, but from my perspective, if there are circumstances that do not allow us to address the professionals, it means that we made a mistake before, like in planning or in estimating threats or risk management or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Because I'm a bit strict, especially towards myself in the situational assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But I strictly believe that ad hoc situation is the product of the lack of preparation before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, generally, I would agree with you. I mean, the events here.
Yeah.
I've mentioned to you a number that I'm talking about specifically, and uh, yeah, I mean, it wasn't. I mean, the one high order one did not have anything to do with mistake outside of that we were in the wrong place at the wrong time. So I mean, yes, taking responsibility for that error. Yeah, I would say that is the case, and I had to make up uh, time and decision making for that oversight. Could we have predicted that that would have been the thing that happened? Uh, no, probably not, but it did that day. And whether you chalk it up to a needle in a haystack or not, and when you've had three or four of those instances, it's usually not. Could we have seen that it could have been an issue at that time of day in that area and being who we are? Yeah, I would say, if I'm being completely honest, that could have been planned for a little bit better. So bottom line is that it was handled, was taken care of efficiently, and the end result is positive, and you learn.
Oh, yeah.
And for me, it's been an ongoing learning experience for 10 years. I mean, this is not a topic that 10 years ago I would have had a lot to say on, to be honest. So, I mean, the learning curve has been steep here for a decade. Um, but I mean, we've talked about that as well. So that is not the average person's circumstance. But I would tend to agree with you regarding the mistakes.
Yep. But if we are still in the circumstances that demands ad hoc decisions, I would recommend, well, changing the route, of course, but
Yep.
to change the route back. To change the route back and to change the route from home next day.
Hmm.
Just and suggest changing them every day for
Yep.
for 2 or 3 days, just to see whether those guys predicted this kind of stuff
Yep.
or not.
Agreed.
It, it's not actually for fun. It will tell you how professional they are.
Hmm.
In case of law enforcement, for example, if you are under law enforcement surveillance, they will carry on tracking you on the second day usually. The first day
Hmm.
you will surprise them, but not on the second.
Yeah, and I mean the thing that people always, like change your route, change your patterns.
They usually think that change your
If
route is the best cure, but usually it is not. You should know how to change the route, and it is actually a science how to change the route properly.
Yep,
To
but
change the
it's
route properly, you should know how the opposite side behaves and how the opposite side thinks. It's also the science.
yeah. I mean, to me there are a lot of factors that go into that, and usually the people that spew the well, just change your route and alter your patterns don't really have any idea what goes into that. I mean, how well do you know your area? How
Yeah,
well do you know diverse routing? Are you still paying attention to why you're changing that route and what's going to be the different dynamic along the way? Can you keep track of potential people a ways back following you? And do you know what those things to do are mid route to find out for sure? What happens if the person who's surveilling you knows where you live and the route is only a temporary alteration that doesn't really change the overall dynamic? Um,
yeah.
what if their target isn't you and it's somebody that you've left behind at that base? I mean, there are intangibles that go into this, and that foresight, that forethinking, is hugely imperative. Um, there are ways to do that without being paranoid. I mean, I take proper precautions on if I'm leaving government documents or ripping up papers to throw in the daily trash that reveal a lot of personal information to me. I'm cautious on that. When I change my patterns, I know why I'm changing them. I have every every coherence as to what the reasoning is as to why I'm changing that pattern, what it will alter, so that I can see more clearly what the dynamic is that I'm dealing with. I don't just
I
change
can
patterns
relate
for
to
the sake
it.
of changing patterns. I mean, just changing patterns doesn't really do anything. But why are you changing? Do you drop your guard if you have a second location? If you go, okay, well, I'm at home right now, so I'm going to change my route, change my patterns, and when I get to work, I'm going to drop my guard. Or are you paying attention to, I don't, one thing that I want to make clear for me living in the environment that I live in is that I don't change patterns just for the sake of changing patterns, and I'm not doing them for no reason. I don't change my daily patterns unless there's a reason to change my daily patterns. Once there becomes a reason, then I know the dynamic that I'm working with. But um, the rest is paranoia. It's like going, that joke, that axiom that we use in the industry where, you know, I'm hyper vigilant. I go to a restaurant, and when I'm in that corner, I sit at a specific table, overlooking a specific thing, and I'm close to the exit points, and I'm looking at all kinds of people to gauge them and measure them and see if they're a threat. And by then, every fucking person in that restaurant is staring at you for the exact reasons that you're trying to be low key and subtle. So I mean, don't react and do things unless there's a reason to do them. Don't build your own paranoia and anxiety for no reason. I mean, once there's a specific need to do them and you're clear on that need, and most times that need will make itself fairly visible, or there'll be at least, why am I under surveillance, or why could I be? Who have I pissed off? Who have I ripped off money from? Why do people see me as a target? I mean, usually you have a pretty clear idea that you could be potentially a target of surveillance. Am I wrong on that?
Nope, agree again. Nothing to add, basically.
I mean, every so often you have that I've been targeted for a home invasion or a robbery or a burglary or a mugging where it's, sudden and unplanned or but even then there are certain things that you can see ahead of time if you're paying attention and looking. I always tell my wife a catchphrase that she always repeats now and laughs about, and it transfers to this too, where I say, listen when people tell you something. Usually they tell you everything you need to know as long as you're listening.
Yep. Active listening is a great skill.
Yeah, and it's both metaphorical and realistic. I mean, I listen when people talk.
Yeah.
I listen for little resentments and little tips that they're giving you on future acts and greater behaviors and who they like and who they don't like and who they've pissed off and who they haven't. And I mean, that's information building. And if it's in your neighborhood, it also gives you that valuable input on what's happening in the neighborhood. People telling you things that you might not otherwise hear. So, I mean, there are always ways to glean where you stand on the totem pole. I mean, what your odds are of becoming that kind of potential target. So, anyways, is there any part of this that you want to get into a little bit more? I see we're running over an hour here already. I'll leave the last points with you so that you can.
You described it quite well from my perspective. So I have nothing to add here. That is
not bad for an untrained civ, right?
Yeah. I always underline this fact.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate it. Do you want to finish up with anything?
No.
Any kind of pointers? Let's how about we end it with this, and you can finish on this. What are the things that people that are not under surveillance can do to at least protect their information? Like we said about what goes in the garbage, like a few pointers that people, can at least start to prep with or pay attention to that, that aren't in a high risk or even a risky situation in any regard, but they can start seeing these things transpiring.
First of all, it's social media. I'm not totally against geotagging, but first of all, from my perspective, it is better to do it post factum. Like I have been to the concert from 5 till 6 yesterday.
Totally valid.
So everything in the past perfect, at least past perfect, and better past simple.
Yep.
It's social media. Then just open your eyes and always the main thing is always critically think about the possibility. Are you really a person worth putting a surveillance upon?
Agreed.
Or you just need to visit a doctor?
Yeah. Often, counter surveillance can be called therapeutic need.
Yeah. And to remember that Counter surveillance performed you personally is a different thing than usual counter surveillance.
What about a
Because
business?
yep,
Sorry, go ahead.
because counter surveillance teams are not subjects of surveillance themselves. It's easier to be a counter surveillance expert than to
Correct.
be a self-taught counter surveillance guy in an ad
Yeah,
hoc situation.
yeah, for sure. Um, I think I'm going to pass the ball to you on this. So, I mean, if anybody has any further questions on this, I mean, to me, Oleg is, and this will be my testimonial. Oleg is a guy that has a ton of knowledge in these areas. Um, I've talked to a lot of people in this industry, and on topics like these, Oleg is one of the absolute best. And what's unfortunate is that most people don't know that. I mean, because he's not a huge name instructor that has done a ton of self promotion. But on these kinds of topics, um, surveillance and counter surveillance and going gray and uh, third world tactics and things like that, escapology and a ton of different elements like this. Um, Oleg is exceptional. And I mean, he has a full recommendation from me on anybody who wants to be pointed in that direction. So, I mean, this was a topic for me that I know he is clearly superior to myself, and I think it's a great showcase to uh, understand why that is. And to me, I've gleaned a ton of knowledge and information from Oleg on these things that help me formulate my ideas on the fly as I'm dealing with things. So, I mean, for me personally, Oleg's input has been invaluable on these to really expand your horizons and to get a real holistic game of threat assessment and risk analysis, which are two elements in this industry to me that are highly neglected and overlooked. So, I mean, that'll be my final word on this.
Thank you
If you
very
want
much,
any
Darren.
information,
It's my greatest pleasure.
so I mean, we'll leave it on that. If anybody has any comments, please let us know.
One small addition. Thank you
Sure.
very much. Thanks, Darren. It's a compliment from you is worth two compliments. And for obvious reasons, I cannot describe some specific things in front of the audience, but in a private talk like with you, I can share a bit more. So, as Darren said, if you have any questions, please private message me. And
So we'll leave it on that. I mean, these podcasts are a little bit over an hour, so to the average person, they're long.
yeah,
But these are worth your attention. These are complex topics where we want to get really into them, not just be the surface thing that you see so often in this industry. I mean, so many people just do the catchphrase and the hey, yeah, you should change your route, alter your patterns for a few days just to make
change your
sure.
route, change your dress.
Yeah, it's so easy to just spew that shit that we have made. Oleg and I have made a personal effort to really delve into these from a different perspective and really give you some valuable information. So they're long, but they're worth the listen. And for me, even participating in them, they're worth the participation. I get a lot out of it, and I glean a lot of info that helps me formulate my daily planning as well. So we'll cut it off at that point. We'll do another one hopefully in the next week or so as we're able. And Oleg, I thank you for your time again. I know it's the
Thank you, my pleasure.
opposite time late for you, so it's probably super late there right now. And I'll let you go on that note. And we'll go again, my
Yep,
friend, in a little while.
definitely. Thank you.
It's been a
And
pleasure.
then bye. And sorry
Okay,
for my English again.
stop. Your English is fine.